Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Paris Schutz. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight,
those promises are empty.
Police who carried out a botched raid on an innocent woman's home are put on desk duty. Is it enough? Healthcare workers brace for a potential spike in cases because of holiday gatherings. An infectious doctor on the latest virus news. The Supreme Court throws out a challenge to President Trump's plan to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census count. But will Trump have time to implement it?
It's something that the police department is supposed to be complying with anyway.
A new proposal would mandate that Chicago police offer suspects a phone call within 1 hour of being arrested. Credit card giant Capital One cuts its suburban office footprint. That and more in business headlines from Cranes. Chicago Blackhawks CEO says a name change isn't on the horizon for that team, but some are pushing back. What happens when patients and healthcare providers don't speak the same language? Two local doctors explain what citizens' rights are in that situation.
What's the difference between Mexican drinking chocolate and hot chocolate? I'm Angelito, and I've got that answer for you coming up.
But first, some of today's top stories. Computer glitches and printer snafus delayed delivery of the $900 billion stimulus bill to members of Congress today. The legislation is about 5,600 pages long, and it gives a temporary $300 per week supplemental jobless benefit and a $600 direct stimulus payment to most Americans. The bill, which President Donald Trump says he'll sign, will give hard-hit businesses a new round of subsidies. There will also be money for schools, transit agencies, healthcare providers, and renters facing eviction. A vote is expected tonight. Joe Biden rolled up his sleeve today. The president-elect got the COVID-19 vaccine before live cameras. Dr. Jill Biden was there for moral support. She got her vaccine off camera earlier. The president-elect tipped his hat to the Trump administration. Take a look.
I think that the administration deserves some credit getting this off the ground with Operation Warp Speed. And I also think that it's worth saying that there's great hope. I'm doing this to demonstrate that people should be prepared when it's available to take the vaccine. There's nothing to worry about.
And Illinois health officials report the number of daily coronavirus cases dipped below 5,000 for the first time since October. There were also 98 additional deaths in the state reported today. That brings the total number of cases in Illinois to more than 905,000, and the state's death toll stands at 15,299. Newly hired Chicago White Sox manager Tony La Russa pleads guilty on a drunk driving charge in Arizona. He'll have to pay a $1,300 fine, perform 20 hours of community service, and spend 1 day in home confinement. After the hearing, the White Sox released a statement that read in part, quote, Tony La Russa accepted responsibility and has been legally accountable for his poor behavior and the questionable choices he made last February. We understand that people make mistakes and exercise poor judgment in life. In this case, Tony is fortunate his decisions that night did not injure himself or anyone else. Tony knows there is no safety net below him. There cannot be a third strike. The city's top attorney is out of a job, and black members of the city council are demanding more change in the wake of the newly surfaced video showing a dozen Chicago police raiding an innocent woman's home. Amanda Vinicky joins us right now with the very latest. Amanda.
Yes, Paris, it's been nearly 2 years since CPD officers carried out a search warrant on Anjanette Young's home, and video of it kept secret, even from Young herself, until reporting by CBS 2 last week made it public. But since then, action has been swift. The CPD out with 20 body and dashboard video cameras like this, and that blurry box, well, that is Young. She's been obscured by CPD in this footage because when they invaded her Chicago home, she was naked. She remained so for minutes that had to have felt like hours until finally an officer covered her with a blanket, even as she was handcuffed and even as she repeatedly told them accurately they had the wrong home. Now, a long-running investigation by the Civilian Office of Police Accountability, or COPA, remains ongoing, meaning the dozen police officers involved seemingly faced no repercussions until now.
All the officers involved in the raid in Miss Young's home have been taken off the street and placed on desk duty. Now, we must respect COPA's independence, but as I have repeatedly told COPA's chief administrator, I firmly believe in the value that justice delayed is justice denied. And frankly, there is no excuse that this matter has languished for a year.
And yesterday, Lightfoot, after visiting him at his home, forced her handpicked top city attorney, Corporation Counsel Mark Flessner, to resign. This after the city's law department had gone to court to keep CBS from airing the video. The mayor says that was without her knowledge.
Desk duty is not enough by any means. Those cops need to be fired. COPA's investigation needs to be completed by the next police board hearing, which is in January. That needs to be done.
Police, part of a newly formed Black Women's Collective. It's a sort of activism, sisterhood, an intergenerational one formed in light of the news of what happened to Anjanette Young. Now, Nicole Johnson is also a leader of that effort.
I saw myself, I saw my mother, I saw my sister, my grandmother. For me, the thought that came to my mind is this certainly looks like, you know, what a slave auction would have looked like in the 1817, 1600s.
The women say something needs to change. They are calling for money to be diverted from CPD to disinvested neighborhoods. They are calling for mental health professionals versus to police to respond to mental health emergencies, an overhaul of the search warrant system, and they want Illinois to pass a law banning no-knock search warrants. Police says it's up to Lightfoot.
Is she going to fire these cops? Is she going to end home raids? Is she going to end the way that a disproportionate amount of violence that is committed by CPD impacts the Black community? Is she going to actually do something tangible? There are so many areas where the city can step in and where Lori and her leadership as mayor can step in. The consent decree is one example of where there has been no leadership and where the city and CPD have been obstructionist in every area.
The mayor points out that after previous issues with mangled CPD raids, she about a year ago made major changes to the search warrant process, and that situation with Young happened prior to her term in office. She says her administration will be more transparent in the future.
Trust has been breached. Trust in our city, trust in me. And that is a trust which I understand and will win back.
The City Council's Aldermanic Black Caucus is also demanding action.
Sure, there will be changes made at the top, but we must get to the root. We keep getting smacked with the same thing. We made some changes, but that hasn't been enough.
The city of Chicago, the Cook County criminal justice system, and the state of Illinois must put policies in place to stop these erroneous and illegal actions from continuing and to hold everyone to the highest standards of accountability and oversight.
Among their demands, creation of a database of search warrants that are based on information from informants so that patterns of unreliable tips can be detected. Also, a requirement that search warrants are reviewed after the fact. A city council hearing is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Paris, back to you.
All right, Amanda, and we'll stay tuned for that. And as we mentioned earlier, President-elect Biden got his first dose of the coronavirus vaccine today, and now a second vaccine, this one by Moderna, has been approved and is on its way to Illinois. All this is amid concerns of another holiday spike in cases and a new coronavirus strain discovered overseas. Lots of COVID-19 news to get to, and joining us to help wade through all of these developments is Dr. Robert Murphy, professor of infectious diseases at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and executive director of the Institute for Global Health. Dr. Murphy, welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Good evening.
All right, so the latest we know, 60,000 doses of Pfizer, 174,000 doses of the Moderna vaccine delivered this week. How will the FDA's recent approval of Moderna impact the vaccination schedule here in Illinois?
Well, it's going to double the capacity at least, if not more. So that's really good news, especially because of the huge number of cases that we have here in Illinois and the United States in general, and the probability that we're going to get invaded by this variant strain of coronavirus that originated in Europe and is now basically taken over London and southeastern England.
All right, so since you brought up that variant strain, Dr. Murphy, I mean, I think the concerns are, is it resistant to the vaccine?
Now, at this particular point, there's no evidence for that. There's no evidence that the basic structure has changed enough that the treatments that we have, like remdesivir and the vaccine and the antibodies, would not work. Now, that remains to be proven. But at this point, it looks like the big difference is that this thing is much more likely to spread. It's easier to infect another person.
Right.
This is not unusual. We shouldn't be surprised at this.
It's a more communicable disease than the current strains of coronavirus. You know, last week there was confusion among the governor, the federal government, and Pfizer as to how many doses Illinois was going to receive. Do we have any more knowledge on why the discrepancy here?
Well, to roll out this many doses of a vaccine, that also another dose has to be taken 3 or 4 weeks later, that is a challenge, especially at minus 94 degrees Fahrenheit for the Pfizer one, and just regular freezing temperatures for the Moderna one. That is a huge challenge. So you're going to see a lot of bumps along the way, especially in this very first month. I think a lot of that will get worked out as we move on, but any kind of operation this big is going to have some stumbles.
And as this is happening, the CDC put out guidelines for the next group of folks that are available to receive the vaccine. Tell us about who can receive it and when they might be able to.
Well, the first group are the healthcare workers who are in the front line. Not even all healthcare workers, just the ones that are actually dealing with potential COVID patients. I had my vaccine this morning, by the way.
Congratulations. How did it feel?
I have actually had no side effects at all, nothing. It's easier than a flu shot.
Well, you know, I should ask you, because there's been some reported allergic reactions in a small fraction of patients. What do we know about that?
Yeah, so in the controlled clinical trials, which between the two vaccines is over 73,000 people, they do report what we call hypersensitivity reactions. Now, to get into those studies, you can't have had a severe allergic reaction to a vaccine. So it's a little bit of a skewed population. And then as soon as they get the vaccine out the door, 2 people have anaphylactic shock in the UK. Maybe a third one also had a serious reaction. And then 2 out of 144 patients in one hospital in Juneau, Alaska, have similar serious side effects, one very serious ending up in the ICU. Now, nobody's died. Allergic reactions, if you're in the right place, can be treated. So wherever in a hospital where you're getting these injections, it can be treated. But that's very disconcerting. We don't normally see that many of these type of severe allergic reactions. So it's something to do with this vaccine.
So something that health officials are going to have to continue to monitor. You know, there was a lot of worry of a post-Thanksgiving bump because of travel. It looks like Americans, perhaps not as much as normal, but in large numbers are going to travel and congregate for the Christmas holiday. Are you worried about cases going back up?
Oh, they're definitely going to go back up. And it depends, of course, where you are in the country. Now, you can see here in Illinois, our numbers are sliding down a little bit, but they are nowhere near low enough to loosen up restrictions at this particular point.
What would you advise folks that are sort of on the fence about going to spend Christmas with family members or a big group?
I think it needs to be avoided if at all possible. This is not the time. We're in a pandemic. It is out of control. And then we have this fear that the virus that is coming in from the United Kingdom and parts of Europe is going to take over, which is going to add like fuel to the fire. if this thing really spreads that much easier than the current virus that we have here.
What do you think the timetable is for, vaccination of a critical mass of the population to where the economy, businesses could reopen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. We've got to reach some level of herd immunity, and nobody knows what that level is. Is it 50, 60, 70, 80%? We don't really know yet. But, by the end of spring, the quote, general population, younger people, people that under 65 years of age with no medical problems, they're going to be offered to take the vaccine. As soon as they start taking it, and all the high-risk people and healthcare workers have already taken it, and people in nursing homes and stuff, you're going to see the rate really plummet. And that's going to be towards the second half of next year. So 2021 will be a good year, I think, at the end.
All right, Dr. Robert Murphy, we'll have to have you on in the new year to give us the play-by-play as this goes on. Thank you so much for joining us.
Alrighty. Thank you for inviting me.
Amid the post-election chaos and COVID news last week, the U.S. Supreme Court issued a ruling that could have a major impact on Illinois and the rest of the country. The court threw out a challenge to President Donald Trump's plan to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census count for purposes of congressional reapportionment. That's the process after every census that determines how many seats each state gets in the House of Representatives and the Electoral College. In a 6-3 ruling on Friday, the court's conservative majority said the challenge was, quote, premature and chose not to rule on the merits of the case. And joining us to talk about what that all means are Jose Acosta Cordova, a PhD candidate at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, who has done extensive demographic study of Latino communities in Chicago. Thomas A. Sayans, President and General Counsel of the Mexican-American Legal Defense and Educational Fund, which has a separate case pending in federal court in Maryland challenging the Trump administration census plans. And Stephen Schwinn, Professor of Law at the University of Illinois at Chicago John Marshall Law School, where he teaches constitutional law. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. I want to start with you, Steve Schwinn. A primer. Explain the case that was before the Supreme Court last week.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, Paris. So President Trump issued an order this past summer directing the Secretary of Commerce to issue, along with a total head count, a number of unauthorized non-citizens in the country to the president for the purpose of determining the apportionment base in the United States House of Representatives. What this meant then is that President Trump would determine the apportionment base based on the total number of people in the country minus the number of unauthorized aliens in the country, and send that apportionment base onto Congress to determine the number of seats each state gets in the House of Representatives.
So clearly the Trump administration wants to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census for reapportionment process. The Supreme Court, Thomas Sayans, basically said it's not the time to hear this case quite yet. What was your reaction to the ruling?
Oh, disappointment. It is certainly true that Donald Trump has not yet done what he intends to do, but he made it quite clear by his directive from the summer that he does intend to take whatever data is provided to him by the Census Bureau about the undocumented population and to subtract it. And in that context, the Supreme Court's decision not to address the merits at this point was disappointing, in part because it means the Census Bureau will continue to waste time and resources on putting together a calculation, best as they can, of the undocumented population to provide to Donald Trump with its apportionment population totals.
So they're essentially not ruling on the merits right now. They're saying let's wait until there's an actual impact and the apportionment happens before we actually rule on this. Jose Acosta Cordova, what's the practical impact of this decision?
Well, there's a lot especially for having an accurate census count is crucial because of the reasons why you mentioned, but also for research centers who attempt to inform policy. Many who use augmented census data either from the Decennial or from the American Community Survey. It's crucial to have a more accurate count in order to produce accurate reports, facts, and figures to better inform policymakers, politicians on which communities need the resources the most.
And given the makeup of the undocumented population, it could mean a loss of resources in Illinois, California, New York, Texas, states with large undocumented populations. Stephen Schwinn, There's only 20 some odd days left in the Trump administration. Is it your understanding that Trump's wishes on the census will go through and the Supreme Court might have to listen to this case once it does go through?
Well, Paris, that's part of the problem with the lawsuit. We really don't know. And the Trump administration itself represented to the Supreme Court that it doesn't know whether it can put these figures together on unauthorized non-citizens in the country. And even if it can, whether it can do it thoroughly and accurately. So we just don't know whether the Commerce Department is going to put these numbers together to deliver them to President Trump before the end of the year or even before the end of the Trump presidency.
Right, they have before the end of the year, and it's assumed that President-elect Joe Biden would probably throw out this whole effort to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census count. Thomas Sands, most constitutional scholars say it's not on solid legal ground what President Trump wants to do. Can you explain the constitutional problems with this?
Sure, absolutely. Since the 14th Amendment, which was adopted after the Civil War, the Constitution has directed an actual enumeration of all persons in the United States in order to come up with the apportionment count. And all persons means exactly what it sounds like. It means every person, regardless of their immigration status, regardless of whether they're a citizen, regardless of whether they have the ability to vote. Really, from the beginning of our Constitution, we've included in the count every person, including those who have few or no rights actually within our society. At the beginning of our Constitution, we actually counted African-American slaves as only 3/5 of a person, the abominable 3/5 rule, which was abandoned, eliminated with the 14th Amendment. So at least since the 14th Amendment, it's been crystal clear that all persons in the United States are to be counted for purposes of reapportionment.
And a lot of the justices in the arguments expressed skepticism that that wasn't the case, that the Trump administration was trying to make. Jose Acosta Cordova, what is behind, in your mind, what is behind the Trump administration's efforts to exclude undocumented immigrants from the census count?
The way that it's happened with Mexican and Latin American immigrants, right, is they've been targeted historically, due to many discriminatory policies, right, the Repatriation Act, the Operation Wetback, and then of course more recently, especially since 2001, 9/11 times, right? So, there's really just there's an urban and rural context as well that you also have to take into account, and just it all has to do with the labor, right? And when the economy is thriving, when it's strong, there's a need for labor. It's reflected in immigration policy, and whenever there's a dip in the economy, it's also reflected in those policies, right? So this has happened since the 30s, the 50s, and now more recently since the 2008 recession, and then again since Trump. So it's really just immigrants have been used as a scapegoat.
If somehow the decision goes back before the Supreme Court and they rule in favor of the Trump administration, what specifically does that mean for Illinois and Chicago in terms of congressional seats and resources?
Well, it's unclear at this point because the Census Bureau may not have the ability to actually enumerate, and that's the requirement of the Constitution, actual enumeration. Actually enumerate the undocumented population. They may only be able to verify the undocumented who are already in detention centers. And if that's the case, and if there was an attempt to back out that limited portion, that fraction of the undocumented population, the impact may not be very high on states like Illinois. If, on the other hand, they were able to identify close to the total undocumented population, you could have a devastating impact here because Illinois is one of the states, like many others, that do have a significant undocumented population, and that has supported the number of congressional seats that Illinois has had going back decades, because prior to the Trump administration, every other presidential administration has understood their constitutional obligation to include every person in the apportionment count.
Stephen Schwinn, the three liberal justices on the court disagreed with the majority opinion, saying it should be argued on its merits and ruled on its merits right now. Explain that dissent.
Sure. So Justice Breyer wrote for the three progressives on the court that the court really should address the merits in this case, that the case was ripe for review, that the plaintiffs had standing and had demonstrated the kind of harm that the court looks for in cases that it will hear. And then Justice Breyer went on to say that it's actually quite clear that reducing the total head count by the number of undocumented non-citizens in the United States, that's a flat violation of federal law and probably of the Constitution as well, which, as the other guests have quite clearly said, it requires a head count of whole persons, everybody in the United States. We've been doing this since we've run a census back in 1790 and consistently counting everybody in the United States.
All right, yeah, so a lot up in the air with the legal efforts, though, around this whole issue. We'll have to leave it there. Our thanks to Jose Acosta Cordova, Thomas A. Syons, and Stephen Schwinn. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Ferris.
Up next, when should suspects in police custody get a phone call? More on that after this.
We can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities. That's something I can get behind.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
When a suspect is taken into police custody, they're supposed to have the right to a phone call. But data from the Cook County Public Defender's Office shows that nearly 1/5 of those arrested in a 3-month span this year were never offered that opportunity, and almost another quarter had to wait more than 5 hours. A new proposal aims to tackle that problem, spurred on by the experience of a wrongfully convicted Chicagoan turned peace activist. Englewood native Charles Jones spent over a decade in prison when he was in his teens, coerced into a false murder confession under disgraced former police commander John Burge. He was later exonerated and built a career as a peace activist until he died last month at the age of 47. His widow, Tremaine Jones, says Charles was denied the right to make a phone call for 3 days while held in police custody in his teens.
If Charles would have been able to invoke his rights and have that access to an attorney, that things would have turned out different for him.
Jones is now pushing for a city ordinance that would require police to give arrestees access to a phone call within 1 hour of their arrest.
Upon 1 hour with them being in police custody is well enough time for someone to be able to call their attorney.
Current state law mandates a phone call within a, quote, reasonable amount of time. Fifth Ward Alderman Leslie Hairston says it routinely takes hours, if not days, and that the phone call represents a lifeline for many in custody.
They might need to call their boss, their job, and tell them, I'm not going to make it. They might need to make arrangements to pick up their children. Most people don't have a lawyer on standby, so that's not, really what the call is for. Most people will call a relative or a friend.
The proposal has failed to gain traction. The Chicago Police Department Chief of Operations told aldermen that it often takes more than an hour to go through all of the steps between arresting and booking a suspect.
All of these factors need to be run through in order to get a subject through the processing process and into the booking procedure, which is where the subject, the detainee, has their first opportunity to make a phone call, have access to the phone.
City Deputy Corporation Counsel Jeff Levine says Hairston's proposal could lead to more police misconduct lawsuits.
Anytime you put in place a hard hour requirement or a time limit, it creates an opportunity for litigation against the city.
The Lightfoot administration has introduced its own proposal to mandate a phone call within the first 3 hours of being in custody.
That's consistent with LA, which has a 3-hour window, and there are other major cities, New York being one of them, that have no rules on when access to a phone has to be given.
City Deputy Inspector General Deborah Witzberg says there are problems with both proposals, and she says the police department should institute a specific time frame in its own code of conduct or document concrete reasons why it cannot.
In fact, it is the purpose of the proponents of this ordinance to change behavior within the police department rather than to collect damages for existing behavior, then department directives are probably the way to do that.
Jones says her husband Charles would not be happy with the 3-hour proposal, and she says it violates the rights of those in custody.
If the Constitution says I have a right to an attorney, why do I have to be left in police custody for 3 hours without being able to access that right? It doesn't make sense.
The city is also facing a lawsuit right now brought by the Cook County Public Defender's Office, arguing the Chicago Police Department is currently violating the law by not offering at least one phone call within that first hour of being in police custody. And still to come on Chicago Tonight, after a major overhaul, a historic North Shore mansion goes on the market. That and more from Crane's Chicago Business. Should the Chicago Blackhawks change its name? We hear opposing viewpoints from two Native American community leaders. What happens when you don't speak the same language as your healthcare provider? Two local doctors break down what your rights are.
In the end, we remember that in Mexico, the traditional way of having chocolate is having drinks.
And we head to Pilsen to learn how to make Mexican drinking chocolate straight from scratch. But first, some more of today's top stories. The U.S. Senate unanimously passed legislation to renew the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative for 5 years. Annual funding was increased from $300 million to $475 million by the 2026 fiscal year. This bipartisan effort means more money to address invasive species, pollution, and toxic contamination in the Great Lakes. The bill will next go to the White House for President Donald Trump to sign into law. The Chicago Transit Authority is one step closer to extending the Red Line. The CTA says it's received federal approval to enter the next phase of its massive extension effort. The current end of the agency's busiest rail line is 95th Street. Officials want to expand it to the city's southern border near 130th Street. The CTA hopes to fund half of the $2.3 billion project, the largest in the agency's history, with grant money from the Federal Transit Administration. CTA says it's made enough headway on the project that if all goes to plan and the federal funds come through, construction could begin in 2025, with service starting in 2029. And you can read more about this story on our website, WTTW.com/news. A Chicago-based nonprofit gets the largest donation in its history. A major credit card company is ditching its suburban office space, and a historic North Shore mansion goes back on the market after a massive rehab. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane's Chicago Business editor Ann Dwyer. Ann, great to see you as always. So let's start with Chicago-based nonprofit Easter Seals, which serves people who have disabilities. They're getting a massive donation from a pretty big name who's been giving out a lot of money lately. Tell us about that.
Well, Mackenzie Scott, as you mentioned, Paris, is the ex-wife of Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos, and she has been using the wealth that she generated through her divorce from him to become truly one of the most important philanthropists of our day. We just learned that she's given Easter Seals $162 million to be spread out over 22 of Easter Seals' U.S. affiliates, including its national headquarters, which does happen to be here in Chicago. That Easter Seals gift is part of an overall $4 billion gift that Scott has just made in the past few weeks to be split between nearly 400 organizations. Another recipient with local roots is United Way of Metro Chicago, which we reported last week is getting $25 million from Ms. Scott.
A lot of happy social service organizations and education institutions, as I understand. All right, the other story in Cranes, credit card giant Capital One. It's got a big sprawling complex in the suburbs. It is actually looking to buck some of the recent trends and move to the city. Tell us about that.
Yes, some of the staff at Capital One's suburban headquarters out in Rolling Meadows are going to be moving to the company's downtown offices. That's at 77 West Wacker Drive. Some of them, however, are going to be working from home pretty much for good, which is quite a change for the 430 so workers who've been headquartered at the Rolling Meadows campus out there by Route 53. It's also a big change for the suburban office market, Paris, because that campus is really big. It's almost 165,000 square feet. It'll have to be absorbed in some other way at a time when demand for office space is really lagging.
So it's not just the city office space that's in trouble, but suburban office space getting hit as well. Finally, Crane's got a first look at a historic home on the North Shore. It's going back on the market, and it's got a name attached to it that is likely very familiar to drinkers of beer. Tell us about that.
It does, Paris. We're talking about the historic Pabst Mansion on Sheridan Road. It's been undergoing an extensive 3-year renovation by a husband and wife real estate development team. The house spans about 20,000 square feet. on nearly 2.5 acres, and it's now going back on the market for an asking price of a cool $18 million. Now, the house dates back to 1926 when it was built for a gentleman named Harris Perlstein. He was the brewing industry exec whose company would later become known as Pabst Brewing. Now, our real estate reporter, Dennis Rodkin, tells me this property has changed hands several times since 1999, and it just kept sagging further in price. The developers who finally did this total reno bought it for just over $3.5 million after it had been sitting on the market for 28 months. So now they're hoping to get that money back and then some, Paris.
Well, whoever purchases this house, and I'm assuming they won't be serving PBR at their cocktail hours. All right, thank you very much. Good to see you as always.
Thank you.
Are the days numbered for the Chicago Blackhawks team name and logo? According to the team's new CEO, Danny Wirtz, the answer to that question is no. But some Native American groups are pushing back, saying the nickname and imagery promote harmful stereotypes, while others credit the team for its indigenous outreach efforts. This comes as Cleveland's Major League Baseball team announced plans to drop the Indians nickname, and months after Washington's NFL team dropped its Redskins nickname. And joining us to discuss the team and its branding are Doreen Weesey, president of the American Indian Association of Illinois. She's worked to change mascots, including at Lane Tech High School and the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And Joe Podlasek, CEO of the Trickster Cultural Center, a Native American and community arts center. The organization has worked with the Chicago Blackhawks for 10 years and will open a new educational wing tomorrow, sponsored in part by the hockey team. Now, we also invited a representative of the Chicago Blackhawks, but they told us that no one from the organization was available for today's discussion, but we are glad you two are here. Thanks so much for being on Chicago Tonight. First, with you, Doreen, do you believe that the Blackhawks nickname and logo should go the way of the Cleveland and Washington franchises?
I do. I think its time has come. We're in a new era in which we're seeing a lot of schools and sports teams change their nicknames of that relate to somehow to American Indian stereotyping. So this would be a great time for that to go forward, and I think we're gaining a lot of support across the country for that effort.
And Joe, your organization's been working with the Blackhawks for years. You obviously have a different view on this. Do you believe that the Blackhawks name and logo is in a different category than the Washington football team and the Cleveland Indians?
Yeah, it's by far it is. The Redskins was a derogatory name. And the interesting story there is that logo was done by a native person years ago until Dan Snyder took on the stance of sheer ignorance. The logo was going to stay and the name was going to go. And then when the decision was made to remove everything. But the Blackhawks are investing in cultural activities and in community.
So, Doreen, what about that? You know, Washington was clearly a slur. The Blackhawks are named after Sauk and Fox Nation leader Blackhawk. The team says it's a way to honor Blackhawk. Is there a difference in terms of impact on the Native American community?
Well, Suzanne Harjo has come out and said that she's one of the leaders in ridding the country of mascots. She's come out and said it's a disrespectful image, and I have to agree with her. It dates back to, really a few hundred years ago where stereotype images were created of our people, and they were meant to degrade us. And this is not an accurate depiction of Blackhawk. He did not look like that. It's a caricature. It doesn't really show who he really was or tell us much about his history and the history of his people and what happened in Illinois. I mean, that's one of the biggest issues we're facing is that people don't know the history of American Indian people in Illinois. So that doesn't, there's a lot that has to be covered. There's a lot of ground there.
Joe, what about that? Maybe the name's okay, but the logo, that face, is offensive. Is there room for compromise on the logo?
Yeah, I mean, if the logo needed to change a little bit, but keeping the same concept closer to what Chief Blackhawk looked like. But part of our opening tomorrow, which is online, shares a ton of Illinois history, circa 1750, all the way to today's contemporary community. So we have a lot of history in our new exhibit, along with a lot of other amazing traditional housing, our tribute to our veterans, STEM technology, and more.
All right, and so the Blackhawks sent us a statement tonight talking about some of those outreach efforts. They say, quote, part of this work will include working with Native partners and educating our staff, fans, and local community on the history of Blackhawk and original peoples of Illinois, as well as on Native American contributions to today's society. We will also continue to expand our investments in Native individuals and communities. Doreen, do these initiatives help with Native communities and their response to these nicknames and logos?
No, not really, because there have sports activities for American Indian children in Chicago. None. We have hardly any tutoring programs. Our history is not taught in the public schools. So you put all those things together, and you see it's a big job, and it's certainly not one team like the Blackhawks is going to solve it. And it has not even made an impact in the last 10, 15 years, or however long they've been working at that in the city. So I think that it shows that it's been a minimal kind of effort, and it hasn't really impacted our Chicago American Indian community.
Joe, you talked about this opening tomorrow and the work you've done with the Blackhawks. Do you believe that it's widespread enough in the Chicago area that it has made an impact?
Well, it's a beginning. So we need to continue to work and spread the word and get more active in communities that are willing. And just for history's sake, when I was the director of the American Indian Center, they renovated the third floor and made a computer lab on one end of the floor and a complete gym for the community to use for basketball, for hockey, and they turned it into an archery range. So they have invested in their kids and now are seeking to redo that.
All right, well, it's a very interesting discussion and debate, and our thanks to Doreen Wiese and Joe Podlasek. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Here.
And now to WTDW News Director and host of Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, Hugo Balta, and a conversation about communications with healthcare providers in a conversation that originally aired on this Saturday's Latino Voices.
When you're having health problems, clear communication with healthcare providers is crucial to understanding treatment. And while medical jargon can seem like its own language, for the estimated 25 million people in the United States with limited English proficiency, finding healthcare that speaks their language is even tougher. Joining us to talk about breaking through language barriers in medicine are Dr. Jonathan Moreira, hematologist, oncologist, and assistant professor of medicine at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine, and Dr. Pilar Ortega, board-certified emergency physician, a medical educator focusing on medical Spanish, and a researcher on physician communication in non-English languages at University of Illinois Chicago Medicine. Welcome to both of you. Dr. Ortega, let's start with you. Why is language concordance so important in healthcare?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to this extremely important conversation. Language concordance means that the patient and the clinician or provider speak the same language. The reason it is so very important is that we actually have research showing that it actually affects patient outcomes. You, in other words, can have better clinical outcomes, for example, better blood sugar control if you have diabetes, if your doctor speaks the same language as you. So we're not talking just about it feels good to have a doctor who speaks your language, which is true. It also makes an impact in your health.
Communication is, of course, very clear and important in those situations. Dr. Moreira, what are providers doing now when they don't speak the patient's language?
Well, there are a variety of resources that can be used. Language line services using a landline phone or even a mobile phone can be utilized. More contemporary technological solutions include tablets that are mobile, can be readily used in the inpatient and outpatient setting. And of course, using in-person live interpreters that are physically present in the room that can also pick up on nonverbal cues and body language.
The COVID vaccine is being administered this week. One of the first persons was Dr. Marina Del Rios. here in Chicago. Here's a little of what she had to say.
As we say in Spanish, hacemos de tripas corazón. We mend hearts out of guts. This vaccine gives us some hope that there is an end point. There is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Dr. Ortega, do you think language concordance in healthcare would improve vaccine uptake among Latinos who are distrustful of the vaccine?
Absolutely. Communication in times of a public health emergency, such as we have seen during the COVID-19 pandemic, really has magnified health disparities for non-English speakers in the U.S. And this is precisely the reason. If we don't receive the information in our language, or at least we don't receive it in a timely fashion, oftentimes information gets translated from English and it takes a considerable amount of time for it to be available in non-English languages. And as a result, those populations are not necessarily having access to the same trustworthy information from public health authorities as the English-speaking population is. And so absolutely this feeds into the distrust because there is truly a lack of information. And as a result, it may also allow other sources of misinformation and disinformation to play a larger role in those communities due to the lack of other sources of information. So having physicians actually and other health professionals, health departments communicate with patients in their language in a timely fashion, especially in cases like this, will certainly have an impact on uptake of the vaccine.
Communication is key, knowing the language is key. But Dr. Moreira, beyond language, how can gaps in cultural fluency affect the care of patients?
Well, I think that can adversely impact care of patients when there is a chasm in cultural understanding. And this is why it's so important to recruit physicians that come from varied cultural backgrounds that reflect the diversity of the makeup of the communities that they serve. There might be misunderstandings as to how patients or community members might perceive medicines such as antibiotics or the belief in alternative remedies, or in my own field as an oncologist, the role of chemotherapy and the perception of side effects as well. So this is something that we really have to have a significant understanding of the cultural nuances and values and perspectives that our patients have. And there is one of the most effective ways of doing that is to recruit physicians and healthcare professionals that reflect that cultural diversity.
Dr. Ortega, have you found healthcare providers or institutions reluctant to address the language gap? What objections, if any, have you encountered?
Well, there are a number of objections that oftentimes come up. For the most part, I have to say healthcare professionals and healthcare institutions really do want to take care of patients. I mean, that is the bottom line for everybody, but there are systemic obstacles and structural barriers that get in the way, especially for individuals who have different language needs and preferences. And so some examples are cost. The reality is that it does cost money to provide interpreter services. It costs money to teach or train your staff to work with interpreters. It costs money to teach or train your staff to learn another language. A lot of physicians and medical students are interested in refining, improving, enhancing the second language skills that they have in Spanish or in other languages because they see that it would be a benefit to them to be able to better communicate with their patients. But all of those things take resources. So that is definitely one of the biggest obstacles. And the other one that I see all the time is time. Physicians want to do their very best for patients. Clinicians want to do their very best for patients. But when it comes down to, you have a bunch of patients in the waiting room, for example, in my line of work in the emergency department, sometimes it's really hard to take those extra 5, 10, 15 minutes that it may take to work with an interpreter, even when people know that that is the best practice in order to give the patient the best quality of care. Time is really against us a lot of the time in clinics as well, when you might have 8 minutes or a short amount of time to be with a patient, and you know that's going to be doubled in the case of a patient who, with whom you have a language discordance.
Yeah, time and those translating services are so crucial. I remember, being a 10-year-old and being that interpreter for my mother and my father. So it's good to see that a lot of more health providers are providing those professional services because, of course, in immigrant homes, you can't have the children being translating adult conversations, especially when it comes to healthcare topics that are so serious. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for now. Our thanks to Doctors Moreira and Ortega for their time and insights.
Our pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
And there's more Chicago Tonight coming up, so don't go anywhere.
A chocolateria has made its way to Chicago by way of local coffee company Dark Matter Brew. On the menu, regular cafe items, of course, like espresso and coffee. There's also chocolate bars and Mexican drinking chocolate that just so happen to be made with cacao beans from Mexico. Arts correspondent Angel Ito takes us to Sleepwalk in Pilsen to learn more about an idea that was 10 years in the making.
Today we are making a little bit of the process of making chocolate. And here at Sleepwalk, we are working with Mexican cacao.
Welcome to Sleepwalk Chocolateria and Cafe, the latest entity by Chicago coffee company Dark Matter Brew.
Really good coffee and really good chocolate have a lot of overlapping flavors that you can really pick out from cocoa beans to coffee beans.
Unlike its 7 other locations, this one is in partnership with La Rifa Chocolateria, which is originally based in Mexico.
It first started with them inviting us to Chiapas, Mexico, and going and be over there to be able to travel, see the producers, understand the processing, understand the chocolate production, and we were so blown away by what they've been able to accomplish there that we were inspired to really bring a lot of these ideas here to home to Chicago.
Co-founders of La Rifa, Monica and Daniel, have been in Chicago during the pandemic, training Sleepwalk employees on how to transform the cacao.
We roasted the cacao beans and then we husk it to get the skin of the cacao nib. This is going to be really helpful whenever we grind the cacao in the traditional stone mills that we also brought from Mexico. These stone mills are big traditional mills that what they're going to do is that they're going to the stones are going to be frictioning one another to get the cacao grinded. We're going then to get a paste, a really, really liquid paste, because cacao has a big amount of cacao butter. So once we have the cacao paste ready, we're going to add sugar and grind it again using our melangers there to create refined chocolate.
The cacao is produced by Monica Jimenez and Margarito Mendoza, 2 farmers based in Tabasco and Chiapas, Mexico. It's because the cacao is grown amongst different fruits, flowers, and trees. Sleepwalk can offer 7 different chocolate flavors.
After we grind and refine our chocolate, we're going to temper it. By tempering the cacao and evening the temperature, we're going to get it crystallized properly so we get this shiny and beautiful chocolate bars that are super crunchy when you taste them. So this is how we then mold the chocolate bars and then we pack them so we can have this amazing first collection.
This same procedure is used to turn cacao paste into tablets that they mix with natural vanilla to create what's known as Mexican drinking chocolate. That's right, the only ingredients are cacao and vanilla, 0 additives. They taught me a little bit of the process.
And we are going to add only hot water.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like a 12 ounces.
Yeah.
We are going to put the molinillo and only you can, ¿cómo se empujar?
Push. Oh, to push it out.
I'm going to.
Disclaimer is I don't like chocolate. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh, that is strong. Yes. Wow, that's so rich and potent and flavor.
For both Dark Matter and Larifa, this collaboration amongst the artists, the community, and Mexico is imperative.
Y queremos que todos se sientan incluidos, ¿no? We want
everybody to feel
included.
I think it's a great way to reconnect with our cultural roots and creating new relationships here.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Ito.
Angel, I'm hoping you brought some for the rest of the class. And if you're interested in trying your own cup of Mexican drinking chocolate, you can visit Sleepwalk, Chicago's local chocolateria in Pilsen on Blue Island Avenue. We have more information about their community partnerships with local bakeries and artists on our website. And that's our show for this Monday night. Please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A look at the economic impact of a second round of coronavirus stimulus checks. And some CPS students aren't getting a picture day this year due to remote learning, but one couple is trying to fix that. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Closed captioning is made possible in part by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, wishing all a happy and healthy holiday season.